Good afternoon, my beautiful people. I go by the name Sotadeology. This is going to be the part two of uh, quantum uncertainty to complex certainty. This is going to be the part two. So now let's dive deeply into it. Okay, so right now we need to look at the title, which says Sotadeology Lecture 21, Part 2. You can see the part 2 right there. Quantum uncertainty to complex certainty. So now, this is the first paper I treated in the part 1. So now you can see that we have commutator operators right here for us to, get speed difference factor. You understand? So as to prove that one cannot get to know position and as well get to know momentum at the same time at quantum level. So now we see that the answer is iota multiplied with h bar, which is not the same thing as 0. So you can see that clearly right here. You can see it right here. And so, it simply means that you cannot get to know position and no momentum at the same time. That is the implication of that. But then you see that what we have is a product of complex system because we have iota multiplied with h bar. H bar is a tiny constant value, so tiny. And so by having that, then it simply means that, of course, there must be a point, there must be somewhere where we can have reality. Now we know the way complex system works. We have imaginary number, which is a number that is not obtainable at real domain. We have it toggling with a real number. You understand? So to me, the way I can interpret this is that you don't have kind of introduction of energy from higher dimension into substrate dimension. And so we have that relating with reality of the substrate dimension. That is the way I can say that. So basically, this is, is like telling us more, contrary to what we have in reductionism, which says that the totality of the component of a whole, when you sum it together, will actually be the same thing as the whole. You understand? It is somehow contrary to that, but at the same time, we have trade of that when we consider the fact that the proper subset of a whole, which is supposed to be half of that whole, when you pair it with that whole set, even if it is infinity, it will become a whole with that infinity. You understand? So now, basically, that is that. I just want to briefly talk about this. Then we realize that the h bar is too insignificant at classical level, and that is why we could have deterministic result at classical level. But then at quantum level, the h bar is so huge to cause uncertainty system. So it causes uncertainty because of this virtue law of speed difference factor. So we have constantly accelerated momentum. And as a result of that, the temperature is too high for h bar to be instantiated. And we only have h bar to be a real value at complex level. And that is when it can, toggle with the imaginary number. So now here in this second paper in the part 1, then based on application of formula of everything, we can define what classical, quantum, and complex phenomena should be by, citing what we have here. Okay, I call that overview insight of reality. And so we have axiomatic condition for reality. So what reality is actually pointing to is that we must have experience and observation cohorting together. We must have localization and globalization cohorting together. As weird as that might sound, that is the reality. Okay, so now we dive deeply into that in this part two to shed more light to that. Then potential solution of reality, what should that be? That is what I just mentioned, that localization and globalization should cohort together. You understand? So you can see that right here. And so now we have this testing experiment. We want to see how feasible it is to have globalization and localization, these two together. How feasible is it for us to have experience and observation together? Because it is so weird for you to say, you can be everywhere and at the same time, you can be. It is so weird to say something can be everywhere and at the same time be instantiated at a localized region. You understand? So let's see how we can actually prove the feasibility of this. And so now by the testing experiment, we see that for us to prove finite notation, we're going to have this formula. And by having this formula, this will make the value to be a substrate of a proper, to be a proper substrate of a particular whole. In this case, let's say natural numbers. So by having this 2n minus 1 formula, we're going to have odd numbers, and odd numbers that we have will serve as a proper subset of the whole number of the whole natural numbers. But then when we pair the two together, we still have it to be to be a whole as the natural number infinity. So what can this provide for us as a solution? Okay, so now let's move further. Then transiting notation should be 2n, which is even numbers. This will generate even numbers. So now when we look at this odd number will be different from this particular odd number in the sense that this odd number will start from 1 all through, while this will start at 3. So now you say 2 times 1 will give us 2, minus 1 will give us 1. 2 times 2 will give us 4, minus 1 will give us 3. Then 2 times 3 will give us 6. 2 times 3, yes, will give us 6, minus 1, that will be 5, and so it can go like that. But then you can see that the odd number starts from 1, but then 2 times 1 will give us 2, plus 1 will give us 3. 2 times 2 will give us 4, plus 1 will give us 5. Now this one starts from 3, and that makes it different from this particular one. And that is the proof. That is to actually prove what formula of everything has done, which states that the mass convergence in the singularity of the Big Bang must be different from the mass convergence in the singularity of black hole. So in the Big Bang singularity, we have energy density. Then in the black hole singularity, we have mass density. So now, but something happens when we start to pair the numbers. Now the thing is this: natural numbers, we have it 1, 2, 3 to 10, then infinitely to n. So now the proper subset of even number will then be 2, 4, 6 to 10, then infinitely to 2n. Now you see that when we start pairing the two, we're going to have countably infinite pairing. We see that the proper subset, which should be half of the real numbers, the proper subset of even number that's supposed to be half of real numbers is actually pairing up with, real number infinity set. So definitely the proper subset is a O. The proper subset is a O because it can actually pair the entire natural number infinity. It can actually pair up with the entire whole number. That is the power of information. Now you say that what we have here is information because it entails pairing. And so I'm going to briefly or quickly give us, the diagram representation of how this is being solved using formula of everything. So now let's get back to our diagram. This is the diagram. Now there is a big problem because based on the axiomatic condition for reality, or probably let me just say potential solution of reality, it says that localization and globalization must cohort. Experience and observation must be unified via static and undulating field. Okay. So now I said in part one that the reason I titled this vertical trajectory, the reason I titled it static and undulating field is for the fact that it is static by being vertical, but yet being elongated by energy for us to bridge this divergence of classical mechanics to quantum mechanics. Now, it is now a compulsory solution for us because quantum mechanics is not compatible. Quantum mechanics is not compatible. Is not compatible with classical mechanics simply because of speed difference factor. And so we have to bridge that gap by having this static and undulating field. But then let's see how this particular issue is being solved. Now, from the solution, we could see that we have an element of stagnancy and also an element of infinity. An element of, or rather, let me say, we have an element of instancy and then element of infinity right inside the static and undulating field. That is the field of reality. And that is a field that permeates the whole universe. But then, how is it being solved? How is it being solved? Via information. This problem of global now. Global now is what Einstein said global now could not be possible simply because there is no way something can be localized in space and yet be everywhere at the same time. And then we're going to see the reason Einstein said that, we'll see it in this diagram, and then we explore how that is further solved by formula of everything. Don't forget, we have it right here, solution of FOE, which is the solution of formula of everything. So now let's dive deeply into it. You see that at the point of this vertical trajectory, we realize that we have genuine contact right at higher dimension. The transition right from the quantum nucleus of substrate dimension to the quantum nucleus of the higher dimension, the transition there is what I call quantum entanglement, and it is the same thing I call complex system, and same thing as superconductivity. So now, by the virtue of quantum entanglement, we know that the wave pattern of that substrate dimension is not different from the wave pattern of the higher dimension by that quantum entanglement. And so by superconductivity, we know we're going to have this uniformed identity. And so by the virtue of complexity, we're going to have this toggling of imaginary number to, real number. So then what this is telling us is that before we can have a real instantiation of any entity in the real realm, we must as well have a counterpart of that in higher dimension. So basically, if you get my book, which is The Invention of Time Technology, you can see how I use this phenomenon right there to portray the real nature of information. You understand? So now let's see how this is being solved. We realize that at higher dimension, we have genuine contact with the electron of the higher dimension, which is instantly converted to positron. For the electrons, for the electron of this substrate dimension to be instantiated. And that is quantum entanglement. But then, relative to the classical mechanics, we then realize that the classical mass worth is being suspended to the intersection of energy trajectory and time. So the implication of that is that even classical mechanics is as incomplete as quantum mechanics. We know that we are able to have quantum mechanics, we are able to have the true measure of quantum mechanics. We are able to have the true measure of that system by having entanglement. So, they say when you measure it, like Schrodinger cat, you can't know if the cat is dead or alive until you observe. And when you observe, it means that you measure. And so by observing, you are going to introduce energy into the system. And so if you are still within the classical level, then you can't get to know reality because the introduced energy will distort the system. But then we can only get reality by having complex system. So based on the virtue of relativity, and then based on the fact that higher dimension gives higher degree of freedom, and so we can get the instantiation. So anytime the wave, as normally said by many scientists, anytime the wave is collapsed, and then we are able to have the exact position of particle, we are able to have the exact position of particle because that particle is being connected to its counterpart at higher level. That is the solution of quantum entanglement. You understand? But then we now see a trait of uncertainty from quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. Okay, now quantum mechanics, we know we have genuine results when there is collapse of wave. And that genuine result is not void of entanglement because the entanglement will connect that result generated to its counterpart at higher dimension. So we have genuine contact at complex level. But then at classical level, we have suspension. Then it means that classical system is also incomplete as quantum system because something must happen for classical system to even be complete. So Now, what that is telling us is that whenever we hold something at classical level, we are not actually holding that thing until we have instant transmission from complex level. So, but it is more or less like it's more or less like that thing is happening. It's happening as if nothing happens, like there is no instant feedback of information before we could actually, realize, or we could actually be conscious of that particular thing that we heard. You understand? So it's because the H bar, like I said in the part one, at classical level is too tiny to be significant. And that is why we could have deterministic results. You understand? But basically, classical mechanics is as incomplete as quantum mechanics. But then, what is now the solution? Because if globalization and localization must actually cohort, then it means that when we have genuine contact at one side, we should also have genuine contact at the other side. When we have genuine contact at complex level, as quantum entanglement, which is the transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension. Once we have that connection, we should also have this classical mass what to be at the point of intersection of energy trajectory to time trajectory. But that is not the case. That is where the issue is. And that's why Einstein said that there is no way we can get global now when relativity is involved. So he said relativity of simultaneity, that global now is not possible. But then we know global now is possible because global now is possible, but it is not possible by the virtue uh, of of how am I going to put it? It is not possible by physical. Global now is not possible by physical, but it is possible by information. Global now is possible via information, and that is why information is so essential. And we'll see why information is so essential as we will progress into the DNA part of this particular tutorial. So now, when you look at it, we see that there is a gap because we have genuine contact at one side, and so we have suspension at the other side. That means that the momentum, there is still an inherent momentum. You understand? And so we cannot say that this vertical trajectory is static in that sense. But then we know it is static because there is feasibility of instant information transmission. And by the virtue of instant information transmission, then we can have the feedback to classical level. So even though the classical mass what is suspended, so information can actually bridge that gap as it travels instantly. Okay, so I'm going to give us a typical, that is actually, synonymous to what I said right here. That I said, don't forget that here I said something. I said, if it should go, don't, I'm going to start from here. Look at where my hand is. If it should go further into space, such that Earth becomes a tiny dot relative to its position in space, given that the Earth moves away at equal speed to that of the man, only then is the tiny dot of Earth is quantum relative to the position of that man as classical. Can you see that? Only then. But then let's proceed. However, if the man should travel further into space such that the tiny Earth is out of his sight, given that the lost Earth can be located by the man at the instant speed, only then is such transition from the known realm to the unknown realm is complex. So that has answered that issue right there. So it means that the only way, the only means by which we can bridge that uncertainty from, complex level, from quantum level relative to classical level is by having complex system. So now you can say that complex system is everything. Complex system is the difference factor, you understand, between position and momentum. Complex system is the bridging gap between quantum mechanics and classical mechanics. And so it is that same complex system that is the value that it is that same complex system that happens to be the virtue of what we need for us to, fully explain or to decode the alphabets in our DNA. So now I'm going to start the part two proper, and I'm going to use this paper which says the link between information and life. The link between information and life. We know that DNA has these four letters. It has A, C, G, T as we have it. And then we can see the pairing of the four letters, being inversely related to, each other. We can see the arrangement. Now we know that what we have right inside the DNA is information. And if DNA is the, bedrock of life, then it means that information is so essential, or probably information is a bedrock of life. So now let's dive deeply into it. You can see that I start this with ABCD. I just have to do this. You understand? So now, if we get to know, the essence of 1, 2, 3 down to 10, then we can get to decode what we have in the DNA by getting to know the position of the letter based on its, alphabetical arrangement. So now let's do that. A is one of the letters, and we have that to be in first position. So you can see that 1 is attached to that. Now I have, maybe I'll later do a video on that. I have, proper interpretation of what 1 is down to 10. What 1 is down to 0. That is all I need to know for me to be able to decode, the letters that we have in our DNA. So now, A is situated at first position. And the first position, I give you a brief interpretation of what 1, what 2, what 7, and what 20 are. You understand? Brief interpretation of what they are. So I did in one of my videos, I explained the full interpretation of 1 down to 0. And you can get that video to know more about this. But brief interpretation of 1 is constancy factor. So this constancy factor, it prolongs either the effect of decay in universe and then the effect of expansion in the universe. So now we realize that the C is situated at third position, and that third position, it happens to be the central It happens to be at the center of, it's more or less like, it's a connector between the past and the future. Let me put it like that. But then the brief interpretation of 3 is transiting neutralizer for flipping mechanism. Don't forget I said that, the momentum has to be totally truncated for us to have a flipped momentum relative to the initial momentum. And so if in the universe we have expanding cosmological space, so it's only ideal for us to have the contracting phase of the black hole only when we could, have the event horizon, which is the transiting point where the initial momentum of the expanding universe will be totally quenched, so as to have the contracting phase of the black hole. So that is that. Then number 7, the interpretation of number 7 is a symbol of perfection and completion for dimensional instantiation and realities. Now, this number 7, what do we have there? We have G right there. We have G right there. That means that letter G is extremely powerful. And so we get to see what letter G stands for as we decode, the 4 letters of DNA. So now the C, we have it at 3rd position. Good. So now the 4th letter, which is the last letter, we have it at 20 position. And the interpretation of that 20 is interdimensional balance of complexity. Now, number 2, the interpretation of number 2 is, balance. We have action and reaction. It ensures balance of the universe. You understand? Then the 0 is more or less like a porter. It's a placeholder for 9. So that 0 being a porter simply means that we can have interdimensional balance, of complexity. And we know that complex system is, beyond, is at higher dimension. So we have that interpretation to be that. So now that we know the position of our 4 letters, now let's dive deep into DNA itself. Now, the double helix of DNA is what I have here. But basically, I have this topmost region the way I have it, just for me to be able to, explain the letter compositions, the arrangements and all that. But then at the bottom, you could see that we start having the double helix formation. But then this DNA, we need to pay rapt attention to its, chemical arrangement for us to understand the importance of the information and what the information is, trying to explain. So now, when you look at the right side, the extreme right side, and then the extreme left side, you see that we have our what is called, we have our phosphate sugar, or we have we have our sugar, which is the deoxyribose sugar. We have it to be that S. This is our sugar, and then we have the phosphate, which is this P, being connected to that sugar. So the chemical bond that we have right there is known as covalent bond. Covalent bond. So now that covalent bond that we have right here, we have it being as well connected to this chemical letter, which is adenine. And then that is going to be our nucleotide. The arrangement, the P connecting to the sugar, the phosphate connecting to the sugar, then sugar connecting to the chemical letter, which is the adenine in this case, that is going to form the base. It's going to form the base, and that is the nucleotide. That is the nucleotide. But then we have another pair of that nucleotide at the right side, right here, and that is the sugar is connected to thymine. Now, adenine and thymine we have to pair together. Then we have to pair together to form the base pairs. And so the kind of bonding that we have here is hydrogen bonding. You can see it there, hydrogen bonding. That's what we have right there. Okay, so now when you look at this, you see that we have this arrangement, and this whole arrangement as we have it, that is our DNA structure. Basically, it's possible to have monomers combining to have polymers, and then it will then form macromolecules. So we have it from monomers to polymers to macromolecules, and at that level it will be so complex. But then this arrangement as we have it level by level. And so under the first one, you can see that we have another arrangement. We have the phosphate, connecting to sugar, then sugar connecting to cytosine, and then at the other side we have phosphate connecting to sugar, and then that connecting to guanine. So that is the proper arrangement as it ought to be. And then another layer beneath that, you can see that we now have the inverse of thymine and adenine, and also beneath that we have the inverse of cytosine and guanine. That is the arrangement. You can clearly see the flipping mechanism. And so if I should try to go through the label as I have it right here, you can see that we have the sugar phosphate as the backbone, connecting to any of the letter, and then pair it as it ought to be. Then we have the flipping mechanism, just like I have highlighted. Then we have, two hydrogen bonds, you understand? And if you look at, we have two hydrogen bonds for, adenine and thymine. But in the case of cytosine and guanine, we have three hydrogen bonds. You understand? So that is that. But basically, when you look at this system, quite all right, the base pair, is not without the cloud of electron. And by having cloud of electron, if by having that, then we have this stacking, then there is going to be a kind of suspension. Electron to electron, we actually repair. But then it is realized that by turning at 36 degree, then the issue can be truncated. So then we can then have proper connection. So it means that every layer we have to turn at 36 degree to overcome the repulsion of electron as we have right here. But then when you now consider the 36 to the 10th level, to 10th level, then you see that will actually amount to 360. I will refer back to this 360 as we progress. So the double helix formation is made possible by making every level of DNA arrangement to rotate at 36 degree. and then the 10th level will give us 360. Take note of that. Put that at the back of your mind as we progress. So basically, the essence of this is just to decode, the meaning of, these letters as we have them. But then when you look at this right side, I have it being decoded as GTAC, and that reads as God the Alpha Creator. If that is flipped, we have it to be Creator Alpha the God. But then if I should remove the comma and I replace that comma with S, then you can see that it makes sense to say the first line will now read as God the Alpha is Creator. God the Alpha is Creator. So now let's say this is the part I'm reading. God the Alpha is Creator. Creator is Alpha the God. Okay, so basically I'm reading this part. God the Alpha is Creator. When you flip that, you have it to be Creator is Alpha the God. So now there is something about flipping mechanism as we have it. Flipping mechanism, like I said, is the signature of Almighty God. And then it is needed for us to have that static and undulating field, reality field, and then for us to have, this formation of double helix as we have it. But then that is related to functional information. Functional information will constrain you to have uh, needed words that when flipped can still, give you meaning. So it is not every letter that you can combine to, to give you what you want. You need to know the exact letter to combine, and that is what we have in the case of the DNA letters. You can see that adenine can only, pair with thymine. Guanine can only pair with cytosine. That is how it's supposed to be. If we have mismatch, if we should have mismatch in this arrangement, that is what would, lead to mutation and all that. So it has to be, we need to get the precise letter, we need to get the precise word that we can arrange. And so we can get to evaluate that by flipping the word. If when you flip the word, if when you flip a sentence or a phrase, that phrase can still make sense, then you know that with the chosen words or the chosen letters, you have made arrangement that is purposeful. You understand? So that is what we have here. God the Alpha is Creator. Creator is Alpha the God. Now, it is highly essential for us to have this Alpha there because God is the Alpha. God is the beginning. God is the first creator. Now, you can see that we humans too, we are now creators. You can see from the advent of AI, we created the AI. But then what I would rather like to say, because, people, especially, the scientists that support evolution, they argue that there is possibility for this self-organization, there is possibility for this self-arrangement and assembly, for us to have emergence of elements, to have evolution as they, normally argue about that. But then the question is this: if evolution is the bedrock, if evolution is the bedrock of life in the universe, why is it that humans have to design AI before AI could come into existence. So evolution could have evolved AI before the intervention of human. And if evolution could not generate AI without humans intervention, then it means that there is this intelligent mind behind everything that could come into existence in the universe. So that is my own argument. And then there are so many other things I can actually use to prove that there is signature of Almighty God in the universe. So there are so many things, so many things. So now let's proceed. So now let's look at what we have here. The four nucleotide the four nucleotide bases in DNA arranged in alphabetical order by their single letter abbreviations, and they are ACGT, just as I have said. And so within the DNA, double helix adenine, which is A, always pairs with T, which is thymine, and cytosine, which is C, always pairs with guanine, which is G. So that is that. But then we need to go through this table for us to have more understanding. So I have the table being labeled name, information, locations, visual, base pairing. Then we have what do we have here? We have a chemical structure. Now adenine, that is nitrogenous bases in DNA and RNA. So we have it both in DNA and RNA. Then the role of that is nucleotide sequence in the double helix. So now location, we have it in DNA as nucleotide sequence in helix. Then we have it also in RNA, and it appears in mRNA, tRNA, and RNA. So now the DNA, the visual base pairing of the DNA, we have adenine pairing with thymine. Now take note of the equal to. You can see that we usually have the flipping of that. Now take note of this. Compare that to this. We have it being flipped. The red dash is beneath the blue dash, but here we have the red dash above the blue dash. So take note of all those things. So now what that is telling us is that in the DNA we have AT, and that is being flipped as TA. Now based on what I explained in the part 1, we know that the TA is not the same thing as AT. You understand? And so now we move to RNA. In the RNA, the adenine is actually paired up with uracil or uracil. I don't know if I got it correctly. Uracil. Yes. Uracil. Yes. Good. So now you can see that is being flipped as well. And then the chemical structure is, C5, H5, and N5. Okay, so now we move to the next one, which is cytosine. Nitrogenous bases in DNA and RNA. The role is to generate pyrimidine. For storing and transmitting genetic information. Okay, so now we have this composition of this molecule, chemical solution that can actually store and then transmit genetic information. That is cytosine, the function of cytosine. Then we have it in DNA. It is prone to deamination. So deamination, which means that deamination turns into uracil, like which uracil I talked about. So deamination could lead to mutation, and that could serve as a big problem. So in the RNA, it can be methylated to form 5-MC, just as we have it right here. It could be methylated, and then in the DNA, the visual base pairing, the DNA, we have the cytosine pairing to be in 3 hydrogen bonds, to be in form of 3 hydrogen bonds. So cytosine pairing with guanine, and then we have the flipped version of that. So in the RNA, we have it to be the same as what we have in the DNA. So now, the guanine, it's a nitrogenous basis in DNA and RNA. Role, it's going to form purine base. It will form purine base for genetic code. It can mispair with adenine. So because of having it to be purine, then it could mispair with adenine. So there is where we have, this issue of mutation and all that. So in the DNA, it pairs with cytosine. So we have keto group at position 6, and we have amino group at position 2. Then in the RNA, it forms codons in mRNA. So now the pairing in the DNA, we have the guanine, pairing with cytosine. The bond is 3 hydrogen bonds, and then we have that flipped. In the RNA, we have it same as we have in the DNA. Now, thymine, that is nitrogenous base in DNA, but not in RNA. Now, this thymine, that is the big thymine is something I want us to actually focus on. It is so powerful. That is what is actually going to give us that passing to the complex system. And the complex system is what we actually, the complex system is so essential for us to have. Complex system is so essential for us to have complex system. Complex system is so essential for us to have the double helix strands. And that is the only way information can be transmitted instantly. Just like what I said in the part 1, the solution that we have, which could give us that global now, is via information transmission, and then information has to be transmitted at instant speed of time for it to be feasible. So right now, this thymine, I need you to pay more attention to it. Now let's look at what we have. Now in the RNA, it doesn't exist, and that is telling us that the transmission that we have is so instant that we can't get. Don't forget that this RNA is actually outside the nucleus. We have DNA in the nucleus, but the RNA is outside the nucleus. So definitely, if I should go back, let me actually get back to this place. I need to quickly prove something before I proceed. Now, you see that this is what I call the quantum nucleus. Now, the DNA is right inside the nucleus, but the RNA is outside the nucleus. And so for thymine, we know that we have the nitro base formation right inside the DNA, which is right inside the nucleus, but we can't get the information of it in the RNA. That is telling us that the transmission, it is that particular thermi that affects that instant transmission of information. And that is why we could not get its own record relative to RNA. It will be so instant that we might not be able to get its record, but we can get the record of others. We'll be able to get the records, and that's why we could get the record of adenine, cytosine, and guanine. We could get their records, the flipped version, the the duplicate of the information in DNA. We can get it in RNA of those three, but yet not for thermi. Okay. Now, for me to use this diagram to explain, when you apply formula of everything, let's say we use this mass worth of electron, we put that in place of the two m's, in the place of these two m's. That will give us the classical counterpart, which is this particular value, 2,277,250,000 kilograms. But now, look at what happens. If we should put this classical mass worth in the place of the two m's of this formula, so as to reconfirm this quantum mass worth, look at what happens. Now, when we put this inside the formula, what we're going to get will be this, 5.7 times 10 raised to power 48. But then, when we'll expand this in standard form, we're going to see that the weak conveying value, which is the value of this 4m, and which is this big convergence, is suspended at 32nd position. So we have couple of zeros. So by expanding it, we have couple of zeros to suspend that weak conveying value at 32nd position. And I said that we need to manually annihilate to get to the quantum realm. But then we know that by default, this will be spontaneous because it's going to be in form of free fall, which is the classical gravity. But then for us to manually annihilate, the value that we get is now 9,109, not 9.109. So that is the value that is being suspended at 32nd. For us to annihilate, then we're going to take that value. It will now be 9,109 over 10 raised to power 32. So now, by the time we'll expand that fraction, we're then going to have it as 9.109 times 1 all over 10 raised to power 32. So when we now solve that further, the answer that we're going to get will now be 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32. You know you have 1 all over 10 raised to power 32. So 1 over 10 raised to power 32 will give you 10 minus 32. So we have it 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32. Now you can see that that value is smaller to the initial value of electron, which is what we have here. Now, it means that this vertical trajectory is being shifted into the black hole. Then it means that we can only apply this trajectory one time, even though we can apply it forward and backward in time. We can only apply it one time. Don't forget that we use the quantum mass worth to get the classical mass worth. By using the classical mass worth to reconfirm the quantum mass worth, then we are traversing that trajectory second time. And so we're not going to be able to reconfirm the initial electron's mass worth that we have used. We are unable to reconfirm it. That is the same thing that is actually happening right here. So we could have the traces of that nitrogenous base in DNA. We could have that traces of it in the DNA, but not in RNA. That is what is happening, because the thymine is the activator, is the activator of instant speed of information. It is the activator of that instant speed of that information, and that is why we have it like that. So now the DNA, in the DNA it pairs with adenine, which is the capital A, but in RNA it is replaced by uracil, which is capital U. It has a methane group or so at C5. Okay, so that is that. And then for the pairing, we have information in the DNA, but not in RNA. And then the chemical structure is C5C6, C5H6, N2, then O2. So you can see the chemical structure of others too. Fine, that is that. So now we need to now take note of what we have right here. Thymine helps protect DNA from damage and aids in DNA repair recognition. It also slightly increases melting temperature of DNA, makes it more stable than the capital A and capital U, uracil and adenine in RNA. Now, the slight increment in momentum is to ensure that the relativistic scaling of time to energy in balanced standard for standing wave into higher dimension as a complex system. So now you can get to see what we have right there, that the virtue of that thymine, the virtue of it increasing melting temperature is for it to balance, is for this thymine to actually balance the trajectory of energy with that of the time, so that we could have the standing wave that can instantly transmit, that can instantly project into higher dimension, and so we could have the feedback of that instantly. So now let me try and explain using this formula of everything. Now, what that is telling us is that this compacted equilateral triangle, it is compacted so as to have constantly accelerated momentum. By having that increased momentum, we know that there is going to be influx of additional information, additional energy. But then don't forget that the momentum will be constantly accelerated. Even though it will try to, maintain the momentum constantly, don't forget that the nucleus system is more or less like negotiation of the most curved region of this energy curvature. And so by angular momentum, we're going to have additional energy influx that will be converted to arbitrary mass convergence, because the additional information must not have any form of movement from one location to another, because we should have global now maintaining this vertical trajectory. So now what we have here is more or less like being on treadmill. When you're on treadmill, you could see that you are running, but yet the running will not translate, into moving from one point to another. You understand? Because we have the inverse. Don't forget that the equilateral triangle is being oriented vertically, so we have the trajectory of gravity to move towards the trajectory of light speed. So we have mass convergence in one side, we have decaying of mass at the other side. Then there will be a point where the two will be equal to each other, and so we're going to have standing wave. So now, when you put this value, this particular value, if you supply this value in the place of the two m's in the formula of everything, then you will be able to track that the mass accumulation is actually towards the edge of the energy's curvature. And so we have more, as we have more contracting nature of the black hole, then we have more accumulated mass worth, which is arbitrary. I call it arbitrary because electron is not being initiated relative to that mass formation. So then the mass accumulation will not increase momentum in any way possible to drift the vertical trajectory. You understand? And so by the time we have the mass accumulation to align with the curvature of energy, so we're going to have standing wave that can project us into the higher dimension. At that point, energy will be at that tiny spot. Energy will be smooth, and that will align with the smooth curvature of time. And so we're going to have global now. So basically, that is what happened right here. That's what happened right here. The slight increment in momentum is to ensure the relativistic scaling of time to energy imbalance standard for standing wave into higher dimension as a complex system. So that's what happened here. And that is why we could have this thermite to be the activator of instant travel of information. You understand? So now, from that, we can get to see that complex system is even the link between information and the life, because it's only when the information can be transmitted at instant speed of time that every creature can be conscious, can be self-aware of its position relative to the position of the quantum particle. You understand? That is where that is the point humans can be self-aware of its position relative to the environment and then decide the next thing to do. So you can say when one is unconscious, the person would not be able to feel his body, let alone to be self-aware of where he is. You understand? So basically, consciousness is so essential. And so we have seen that. And so by being conscious, it means that the information is purposeful. So now let's quickly dissect this. T at position. Now I'm going to quickly dissect, the position of T, which is 20, to explain the flipping mechanism and then proceed to the next paper. So now, T at position 20, this indicates a flipping system of the universe. How is it a flipping system? That 20 as we have it can be rewritten as 2 times 9. Don't forget that 0 could serve as placeholder for 9, and I will explain further as we progress. 2 times 9 will be 18. However, 0 can serve as a placeholder for 9 when merged with the digit and later flip the digits so as to have 20 minus 2. That will as well give us 18. So now, the digital root of 18, 1 plus 8 will give us 9. So now, what do I mean by that? For me to better explain this, I will have to use this particular diagram. But then before I use this diagram, let me briefly use this one. Because with this, I can actually, open your eyes to that asymmetric nature of the inherent asymmetric nature that we have in the symmetric nature of equilateral triangle. So now, one thing about what I did, the mathematics I did right here, let me quickly try to explain it further. The thing is, let's say we have 2 times 9. Let's say that is what we have, 2 times 9. So for us to get the answer of 2 times 9, we can just say 2 times 9 and say it is 18. But then don't forget that you can as well get the 18 by just replacing that 9 with 0, then merge it to that 2. When you merge that 0 to that 2, it will be 20. Then what you have to do is just to flip that 2, the digit 2. Flip it such that you have it to be 20 minus 2, and that will be 18. But why is it like that? You can actually do this with any number of 9. Let's say we have the number to be, let's say we have this to be 2 times 9. Instead of having it to be 2 times 9, let's say we have it to be 2 times 99. Then you can replace the 9 with 2 zeros. Merge that with the 2. That will give you 200. Then flip the initial 2 such that it will now be 200 minus 2. And that will give you 198. And that is the answer. If you have the 9 to be 3, 6, 7, 10, 1,000, 1 million, you can do it like that and it will always give you that same answer. Now, what that is telling us is that 9 is instant, like I said in the part 1 of this video, because you can always have the instancy of 9 when you double 9 and when you even half 9. When you double 9, when you half 9, for instance, let's half 9. If you half 9, it will give you 4.5. 4.5, to get the digital root, you will add 4 to 5. That will give you 9. If you double 9, if you say 2 times 9, it will give you 18. If you add 1 to 8, that will be 9. But if you half or you double 3 or 6, you will have the results to alternate with both 3 and 6. So that is why when you look at this equilateral triangle, it is equilateral triangle because you have the repetition. Look at the left side here. You have the repetition of 1 in 10 places, and then you have variation of 1 down to 0 in 10 places as well. Then you have this 0, the baseline, you have it right from 1 down to that 0 in 10 places. And that shows that this triangle is equilateral triangle. Having it to be equilateral triangle, it means that it has to be symmetric. But can we then see any form of asymmetry embedded in this equilateral triangle? Okay, so now we see it. We see that we have constancy of 1 to variation of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 0. And then when you look at the baseline, you still have the same thing because you have variation of 1, 2, 3 to 0 relative to that topmost 1. And what we have in this equilateral triangle is synonymous to what we have in that equilateral triangle, which is this. We have discrete nature of energy to continuous flow of time. Discrete nature of energy we have it to be whole number, which is the constancy of 1, while the continuous flow of time is the variation of 1, 2, 3 as we have in that equilateral triangle. So now look at what I have written at the left side. I said expanding phase by constancy. But look at the right side. I have it to be contracting phase by variation. How is it that the variation is contracting towards 0 and the constancy is expanding? So what that is telling us is that in equilateral triangle, when you have expansion at one side, you must always have contraction at other side. Look at the base. You can see that system is being flipped. At this side, we have expansion by constancy, but at this side, we have contraction by variation. How do you get to know? Count this one, you see that you have it in 10 places. Count these 2 diagonally as you have it. You see that you have it in 9 places. Count these 3 diagonally as you have it. You see that you have it in 8 places. Count these 4 diagonally as you have it. You see that you have it in 7 places. Count these 5 diagonally as you have it. You see that you have it in 6 places. Count these 6 diagonally as you have it. You have it in 5 places. Count these 7 diagonally as you have it. You have it in 4 places. Count this 8 diagonally as you have it in 3 places. Count these 2 diagonally as you have it. I count this 9, you have it in 2 places. Then you can see that the variation is actually contracting towards 0. But then when you look at this baseline, you see that the baseline is expanding by variation, which is contrary to what we have here. You can see that the equilateral triangle is being flipped. This is expanding, but the topmost one is contracting and it is suspended. So right now, you can see that at the extreme end of this equilateral triangle, I have 3 here, I have 9 here, and I have 6 here. That represents the 369 of Nikola Tesla. And that 369 is the key to reality. 369 is the key to reality. And so we'll dive into that for you to see. But before we dive into that, I need you to see the total sum of this equilateral triangle as we have it. What do we have there? We have the toggling of odd numbers to even numbers. 1 is odd number, 3 is odd number, 6 even number, 10 even number, 15 odd number, 21 odd number, 28 even number, 36 even number, 45 odd number. Then this 0 is the same thing as 45. But when that is flipped, you're going to have it to be negative. So you can see what we have there, the toggling of even number to odd number. And so if I take you back to this table, you see why even number and odd number are so essential. Okay, so now let's get to the last paper. This is where I want to prove that the signature of Almighty God is in the universe. But before I do that, I need you to know that we have suspension right here in the equilateral triangle, and we have suspension here by classical arbitrary suspension. Now you see that we have suspension here, inflationary suspension, and then we have suspension here, neutron star suspension. Now you can see with this, I can actually prove that indeed the signature of Almighty God is in the universe. Now, we can see that there is introduction of energy from the higher dimension into the substrate dimension, which is so contrary to reductionism. Reductionism says that the totality of the part, when you sum it, will be the same thing as the whole. We have trait of that, but then we have introduction of energy. At that low energy state, we cannot have momentum towards the core singularity of black hole without having that introduction of energy. And so you see that everything in life, in the universe, you have to supply energy. And that is why people are yet to generate perpetual motion machine. But then we have that perpetual motion. We have introduction of energy for us to continually have momentum in the universe. So now we can see that indeed the reason we have suspension in the black hole, the reason we have suspension in the Big Bang, the reason we have suspension at the present phase of time peregrination or event horizon is for us to have the factor of speed difference. The factor of speed difference that can allow for emergence of standing wave that can invite additional energy into the system. That is the essence. So now let's quickly prove the signature of Almighty God. Let's look at the title. The mathematical patterns that prove the signature of God in universe. Now, when you open your Bible to Mark chapter 15, verse 25, and then you go to verse 33, if you read it, this is what you get. And it was the third hour. Third hour is 3. And they crucified him. This part was actually referring to Jesus Christ when he was crucified. Then verse 33. And when the 6th hour, which is 6, was come, there was darkness over the whole land, and until the 9th hour, which is 9. Now, that verse can be interpreted as 369 by taking the 3rd hour, 6th hour, and 9th hour out to form its, digital representation. So we have it to be 369. Now, Nikola Tesla first came up with this 369. Then he said, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration to find the secret of the universe. Then there is another quote. He said, if you only knew the magnificence of the 3, 6, and 9, then you would have a key to the universe. That is Nikola Tesla's opinion. But then the geometric representation of 369 is what we have as this. It is equilateral triangle. Equilateral triangle. We have 9 at the topmost. Then we have 6 and 3 alternating. Okay, so now Nikola Tesla said we should think that, Nikola Tesla said that we should think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. But according to my research discovery, when you look at energy, frequency, and vibration, they are just frequency is the byproduct of energy, and vibration too is byproduct of energy. They are the same thing, but then I changed that based on my novel research discovery. The novel discovery of Sotadeology, the 369, according to Sotade Olusegun's research, should be interpreted as 3, the present or reality, 6, the future or energy, then 9, the past or worth. So we have to think in terms of worth, reality, and energy, because there is reality in the universe. Okay, so then let's go to Matthew chapter 12, verse 40. Jesus Christ made reference to, don't forget that in this first Bible quotation, from that third hour to sixth hour, we have bright day light. But from the sixth to the ninth, then darkness has covered the whole earth. So you can see that this has divided the 369 into day and night. Now let's see how Jesus Christ made reference to that. Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 12, verse 14, verse 40 rather, he said, "For as Jonah was 3 days, 3, and 3 nights, 3, in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Jesus was actually referring to himself, and so he made reference to day and night, just as we have in the first quotation. But then, if you look at what Bible said concerning day and night, Bible said that night is the period to accumulate knowledge, to accumulate wisdom, while the day is the period to apply wisdom and knowledge. So it's all about information. You can see that day and night, it's all about acquisition of knowledge, wisdom, which is night. It's all about acquisition of knowledge, wisdom. Then the day is about application of knowledge and wisdom. And it is still about information. So now, 33, that is the years of Jesus on earth. The first 3 stands for 3 days in the grave. And the second 3 stands for 3 nights in the grave. Based on 33, we have the following mathematically. Now, these 33 years of Jesus Christ on earth, we can actually relate it to 369 as well. So how can we do that? We're going to do that by saying, so when we have index as this, which is 3 to the power of 2, that will be 3 times 3, which will give us 9. So the inverse of exponential worth of 9 is, I said the inverse of exponential worth of 9 is, the reason I said so is for the fact that if you are to have inverse of 3 squared, such that it will now be 2 to the power of 3, if that is what we have, that what we're going to get is going to be log 8 base 2 equal to 3. It is not going to be log 9 base 2 equal to 3. So you can see that this logarithm is actually pointing to reality of the universe. Logarithm is so powerful to show us the asymmetric nature of the universe. Now, if you have 50 gram of salt, if you put it inside water and taste it, 50 gram of salt. If you now put 100 gram of salt in that same quantity of water, you expect that the taste of salt should be times 2 of the initial one, but that is not the case. You will realize that the salt taste of the 100 gram will be more than times 2. And that is the reality of the universe. That is the reality of the universe. That is why logarithm is actually pointing to reality. Now you can see how that 9, how the initial 9 that we got, how that is being shrinked, or how that, you can say how that is being decayed to 9 if we have the inverse of 3 squared. If we have the inverse of 3 squared, then the actual answer of 9 will be decayed, and then the value will be 8. So you can see that is a kind of, finite notation like what we have right there, right here. That is, we have -1 right there. You can see that we have -1, and so we have it decayed to 8. That is the finite notation. It's a kind of suspension within a substrate dimension. But then let's go and look at the suspension at higher dimension. So now, when we now look at this, by saying worth of 9, that means we're going to retain the 9, then flip that 3 squared such that we still retain the 9, and whatever that gives us, you understand, will then be, what we have as answer. So now for us to do that, we then realize so now you see that when we do it like that, we're going to have log 9 base 2 equal to 3, but it's not going to be 3. The answer is going to be equal to 3.1. You can say addition of 1. That is the suspension at higher dimension. So, but approximately I can have it to be 3. And so you can see that then we have our result of 9 and result of 3. But then if you get the digital root of 33, then it will be 3 plus 3. That will give us 6. And so the years of Jesus on earth, which is 33, can then be connected to 369. That is the reason Jesus Christ is the truth. Don't forget the Bible says that by mercy and the truth shall iniquities be purged. By mercy and the truth shall iniquities be purged. The mercy is referring to God the Father. The truth is referring to God the Son, which is Jesus Christ. So now, when we now take the equilateral triangle of the night and that of the day, we now stack them on top each other. We're going to have the symbol, which is known as Star of David. And that is what we have at that event horizon. So that is what can project us. That is what can project us into. So now you can see the symbol. This is the symbol, Star of David. And so that is that. This is the part 2. I'm going to call it a day. I will put a link to my research publication in the description below, and I'm going to put link to my published books on Amazon. in the description below. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe so as to be notified for the subsequent upload. Thank you. God bless you.